Hey everybody, this is Marc Hart, System Basketball, doing another podcast here. Over the next several weeks, I'm going to be doing Dribble Drive Motion podcast with me just doing it. Maybe we'll get some interviews, but it'll probably be me going over different strategies and different talks about the Dribble Drive Motion Offense. I've been running it since 2008 with various ways, done it 5 out, done it 4 out, 1 in, done it where I've ran a high post spread, done it where I've ran Euro ball screen, ran it with chin entries, point series entries out of the Princeton. Today we're going to talk about gaps. Get a lot of questions on what do you mean by a single gap, a double gap, and a triple gap. So we're going to go over that today, and then we're going to show you a few ways of how you can open up double and triple gaps, which is the ideal situation for the Dribble Drive Motion Offense. This is mainly audio for the platforms that you guys listen to, but you can also get this. You can also watch the diagrams and stuff that I'm showing as I'm talking here if you watch this on Spotify or if you go to my YouTube channel, System Basketball. I'll drop a link in the podcast notes so that you guys can make sure that you're seeing these diagrams and it will better give you an understanding as I'm talking here, as you can see the actions on an animated diagram board that I'm using from Fast Model Sports. So first of all, let's look at what original 4 out 1 in looks like, and that's typically what you play Dribble Drive Motion out of. So when we're talking about gaps, we're talking about the spacing between players. So if you're looking at 1 and 2 here on your board, this would be a single gap. This would be a single gap. And between 4 and 3 would be a single gap. 1 has the basketball. So what the Dribble Drive Motion Offense does is, first of all, it changes the spacing on the court to open up gaps organically to begin with. So the 2 will move to the corner. The 3 will move to the corner. 5 will be here, and we have 1 with the basketball. Now, some people have it this narrow. Some people will move 1 more a little bit here and 4 a little bit here to open up that gap. For all intents and purposes now, 1 and 4 we would still consider a single. 1 and 2 is a double. And as you can see, we moved the 5 to the weak side to open up the spacing for the drive, since this is a drive mentality, attack mentality offense. So we want to have as many double gaps and triple gaps as we can. So when we're doing the offense, we're trying to find ways to do this. And a real simple rule for you to understand and help your players when they're running this offense is we pass through single gaps and we drive through double and triple gaps. Now, if we're looking at this and they start putting defense on the board, the driving options for 1 would not be very good if X4 is sitting here in the nail area, which is the middle of the floor near the free throw line. If X2 is playing on the line, up the line, our gaps have now shrunk for our driving, and X1 is guarding here. Okay, so as we're looking at this and creating gaps, we got to understand how the defense is playing. If X2 is here, we have a little bit more drive to drive this right side gap between 1 and 2, since it's already a double gap. We typically do not drive in these situations. We usually start with a pass or a cut, and that is how we start opening up triple gaps. Okay, so a triple gap would look like this. Let's say 4 cut through, and X4 went with them. Now, the reason why we call this a triple is this would be a single, this would be a double, and then since there's three spots open, that's why it's a triple gap. And you want to get these as much as you can in this offense, and it allows your players to be more successful to get downhill and into the paint and drive through the elbows. Driving through the elbows means we want to drive through these spots up top. We don't want to drive east and west. We want to drive downhill and into the paint, which causes the defense to get into rotations and help. Okay, so that is one way. That is right there is where, again, we're seeing this is space between 1 and 3 is a triple gap. So in this situation, 3 has to hold the corner. People get impatient and they want to come up. And if they're doing that, they would be bringing their defender up the line into the gap, preventing 1 from getting downhill and preventing X3 from helping or staying. You're allowing them to kind of do both in this situation. So you really need to teach patience in the corners in this offense. Another way we can open up gaps is by passing the basketball. So if we passed, that would make X4 have to come out and guard, or they could stay back, which is fine. Now 1 would cut through. Now we would just have the opposite here, and we would have a triple gap between 4 and 2 because 1 went to the corner and 3 would come up. 3 would be here and 1 would be here now. Okay. So passing, that creates a gap. Another way to create a simple way to create a gap and create a double gap or triple gap situation is by doing a handoff. So if we do a handoff here between 1 and 2, which is very popular, 4 would stay wide. So we would have a double gap. Not ideal, but it's still an opportunity to turn the corner again, and we would want to drive through the elbows. We want to drive through the elbows. We don't want to drive east-west. So a key teaching point is driving through elbows, getting their shoulders north towards the rim as soon as possible. If they can get their shoulders turned towards the rim, more than likely they're going to be able to get downhill. Okay. So we have passing, we have cutting, and we have a dribble handoff. Those are very simple things to do. Now, based upon how the defense guards again, if this player is kind of playing tight on them, and if they're out here, it gives 1 an opportunity to drive middle. And it's more of a double gap, so they can drive this. If they were tight, like we said before, this is a single gap. So we would have to pass through this. You don't want your players to drive through this. There's no gap there. So it just causes problems and your offense gets bogged down. Okay, so people start them off wider. So based upon where X4 is in this situation, 1 could drive middle, and then we would flow into our offense. Now, if we want to create a double gap or a triple gap in this situation, and 1 has the basketball, we can do a few things. We can do the through cut, which is the corner cut that we just showed. So 4 could cut through. X4 would more than likely follow, and that leaves your big gap there between 1 and 3. There's your triple gap into a left-hand drive. 2 would be lifting, X2. So ideally you want them to go left, because if they drove this way, this is a single gap. This is not ideal situation here. So we need to understand intelligent drives, when to drive, when to pass. So in this situation, if they didn't like it, they would pass. They could cut away, and then that opens up gaps for 2 to drive, or go slot here, and that still opens up a gap. By them just standing there, 2 does not have an opportunity to drive. The whole offense is predicated on penetrating and kicking, So you want to open up the gaps as much as possible. Okay, so that was one way. Let's move this. Here we go. Now, other ways are people can run a nail cut. So a nail cut is going to the nail and cutting out. So instead of cutting through, the 4 is making a smaller, shorter cut on this one, and now they can drive. On this situation, they can switch that more often than if they did the through cut. If they did the through cut, it's harder to switch. And on this one, they can kind of just zone the top, and you're not going to get the downhill attacks. So I prefer the through cuts more than any cut up here. And the last one that you guys can do off of just the 4 cutting here is we can do a blur or a ghost. They're really pressuring your player and you want to create confusion, you can do that, and that creates the downhill. Now all of those same actions can happen off the pass. So now one can cut through, one can nail, and one can ghost blur. So those are the 3 basic cuts to get you into the dribble drive offense. Now, how you get into the driving and attacking, you can do lots of things. I'm going to show you a couple today in this short little podcast on creating gaps and understanding single, double, and triple gaps and why they're important. So now we could go dribble handoff, dribble up, pass across, and now this player could through cut, nail cut, or blur cut based upon how the defense is doing that. So until your players get more knowledge, that could be whatever you want to call your handoff, flip to through, flip to nail, flip to blur, where you can name your cuts to help your players, and then you just add the call of how you wanted to, the trigger of how you wanted to start your offense. Another one is the wave action that I've shown on other ones. Done a full clinic on that inside the System Basketball community if you're interested in learning the wave series. So wave series is a swing attack, and now your 1 and your 4 cut through, and 3 is right here by themselves with this huge gap here to help them get downhill. So those are a few ways that you can get into the dribble drive motion offense, and hopefully today you learned a little bit more about what a single gap is, a double gap, and a triple gap, and why they're important to create these double and triple gaps to get downhill north-south attacks that are vital to having an efficient dribble drive motion offense. So again, remember, we're going to pass through single gaps and we're going to drive through double and triple gaps, and make sure that you have some things in where your corner players, such as the flip, the dribble handoff, or the swing attack wave series in your arsenal to create these gaps. And you're not just doing it with your 1 and 4 man up top. You're involving your 2 and 3s as well to get more of a flow into your dribble drive motion offense. I'm sure some of you guys might have some questions regarding this. I do have a free Facebook group. If you want to, I'll drop it in the show notes as well on Facebook. Dribble Drive Motion Hoop Talk. Created it with Kurt Gelsdorf a few years ago. We have close to 5,000 coaches where there's various talks like this in there, coaches asking questions. And if you want to work with me and Kurt, we did a full A to Z course on it, on installing drills, practice planning, how to run this versus switching, how to run it versus pack line, all that. You can get access to that at systembasketball.com. And Again, if you're not subscribed to the podcast, please do so. And if you can give us a review and a like, it will help us out for this to get out to more coaches. And we'll see you next week for another Dribble Drive Motion talk. And hopefully we'll help you guys with your drive and kick offenses. Thanks again.